Hi, I'm Beaches Cores, and welcome to another episode of EU5. I am playing the nation of Byzantium, or as I've set it up in this game, the Eastern Roman Empire. Byzantium is the subject of the new DLC that will be coming out in a couple of months, so I thought it would be fun to have a playthrough before that all kind of comes down, just to see the mechanics as they currently stand. As you go through the campaign, you can see they have a ton of debt when you start the campaign, right? They're almost 10% inflation right from the jump. So, they are the bedrock of financial stability in Greece. You just cannot be afraid of going into financial ruin as Byzantium. When we go through the states, they have a number of corruption mechanics that you want to remove as soon as possible, but it's a challenge because you have low stability, you have low legitimacy at the start, and every single estate has a corruption that you want to remove. The commoners is a little bit easier to remove, which is 15 stab, but the nobles is over 173 that you can't physically remove at the start of the campaign. So it's something that you want to get rid of once you kind of boost your stability up to 50%. If you're pushing towards communalism, those numbers come down a little bit. In terms of estate setup, you only have 11 legitimacy at the start of the campaign, so you can't take too many things. Elite Council is something that is good at the beginning, especially as it has that push towards aristocracy. But I wouldn't do anything from a noble's perspective. You don't want to give them any more power than they have at the start until you remove the corruption that they have. Commoners, common militias is a good one to give out at the start. But ultimately, I like to use from the burgher's perspective the land rights in order to push that out as soon as possible. There's a number of things that they have, like the aux there with the nobles. That's pretty good at the start, but something that moves, as you move through the campaign, or estate privileges that you'd want to revoke once you get your stab up to a manageable level. Land rights is another good one. They can kind of boost the RGOs early game when you're still kind of recovering from an economic perspective, which just helps you snowball from an economy perspective. The clergy is another estate that you want to boost as much as possible, especially as you're going to be converting a lot of Sunni and Catholic provinces in and around the Balkans and Anatolia. So things like religious diplomats can help you as you're doing a decentralized vassal swarm, or if you're following how I'm playing through on the latest mechanics on using the decentralized mechanics to create those one province vassals all around. Building rights, can kind of bring down the building cost that just snowballs as you go through the campaign. But urban development grants is probably the best one to do at the beginning of the campaign because it just kind of snowballs throughout the duration of the campaign. So those are ones I would take early game. Then I would use the remainder of my legitimacy to just boost my cabinets. I usually like to do from a start of the campaign, use one cabinet just to strengthen my stab, strengthen the government with legitimacy. For the 2 of the 4 cabinets that you have as an empire, which is nice to have. You only get 2 from some of the other nations that I played. Support the Patriarch is good because it does give you events where you can boost your legitimacy or stab if you're, and a couple other things if you have maxed those out. Province control is also another good thing to start at where you might want to rotate between some of your higher performing provinces there in Byzantium or over there into proper Greece, and rotate between them as you start to grow your stab further, and then rotate to the other one and just kind of ping pong and play those mechanics, at least until you kind of get to a more stable economy, able to kind of connect your areas via roads and ports down the line. I've decided to from the one law that you have to select at the beginning, just go for the trade efficiency is how I prefer to do it. It will be a time until we have enough silver and gold once we get into the Balkans. Tech is pretty simple from a straightforward perspective. You will get a lot of the newer tech, H2 tech, once it clears in the next 10 years. It spreads to your lands pretty quickly into Constantinople, So just kind of select some of those until you get the next age of tech. You want to make sure that it's spreading to you as quickly as possible. Turn down your fort maintenance, turn down your army maintenance, and you start to turn a little bit of a profit, knowing that you're printing money really just to kind of stay afloat. But really, it's just about boosting as much as you can from a stab perspective without going bankrupt. Same with the cost of court, but you will lose all of your legitimacy in events almost immediately once you unpause. So it doesn't make sense to pay for court until those negative legitimacy events fire. And then for kids, I just always use admin, right? It just kind of boosts overall your crown power. I don't have the ability to pay for the expensive education, so I usually just kind of focus on making sure that they have high admin focus at the start of the campaign. Rivals, this is really up to everyone's play styles. Bulgaria and Serbia will probably ally each other at the start, but then there's events. If you watch my Serbia video, they break that alliance, so you're not really worried about the two of them allying each other. Wallachia will probably ally both down the line anyway, so you might have to fight two of those nations. But ultimately, the goal of the campaign is to conquer the Balkans, conquer Anatolia, and then start to make your way towards proper borders as the initial goal of the campaign. This would be my ideal setup from a country perspective, but as we go to the campaign, you'll notice that my legitimacy is much higher because I decided to race forward when I was doing my initial playthrough just to understand some of the events, and I figured it would just be more fun to have a proper playthrough without RNG, so to speak, just to kind of see how it went and how I can kind of react to the negative events as they kind of pop up from the succession crises that happen early game with Byzantium. With that, let's take it away into the campaign. Right off the bat here, you get the negative event, 20 stab, the Turkish threat, which just launches the Byzantine campaign. Just to kind of note, you want to go after the Ottomans to kind of get them before they start to. And then in terms of reforming the judges, I just reform them. It makes a bad reform just a little bit better. Luckily, they do mix in some good events and bad events. Here's legitimacy pop. I usually just I prioritize stability first, but then sometimes it's like stability or legitimacy. I just pick the stab because it's harder. And then here, lose legitimacy and money. Unfortunately, it's like you either lose money going more into debt, or you lose legitimacy or stability for each of these events. So pick your poison. I picked the legitimacy to gain it on this one. So you lose it, you gain it, or potentially taking new loans and going into further and further debt. You can see my nobles are going to rebel, and I will go through a. And then I gain some of that stability back again. I always just kind of prioritize the ones that give me stab because it's harder to pay for that than legitimacy is. For this one, I'm not really worried about Armenia. I'm not going to take any kind of stab hit just to keep their opinion of me up. And again here, just taking the legitimacy. And then as you can see here, my ruler died, and we get to that succession crisis, which you do have to get your stab and your legitimacy up in order to get that as soon as possible. And you have to get it up pretty high before you can end that crisis. But as I mentioned before, you get into a civil war pretty quickly if you're pissing off your nobles' estates like I did. Easy enough war to win, and a lot of times you can get some pretty good events there. As you can see, kind of strengthen some of your fighting as you're going through this war. So it's simple enough to win this war, and then sometimes it kind of gives you some of those positive events that just strengthens your military. And you're going to need it all you can, right? Because of the negative modifiers you have at the start, you need all the help you can kind of get. So this event kind of helped me to strengthen my military as I go into wars with the Ottomans and Bulgarians and Serbians pretty quickly into the. You're going to also want to push eventually towards Naval, but the land, you're going to need all the help you can with your army from the start of the campaign. And in my campaign, I was just trying to see if I could survive without doing the inflation hack, but it just really is not possible, right? You can see I have over 15 loans already. I'm close to bankruptcy, so I just boosted up my income, minting to go all the way up. I'm starting to get some claims slowly but surely on some of my neighbors in order to kind of boost those up. And then I move into the next tech. I always take admin. I wanted to take Diplo just because it gives you the war score, just to kind of see what that is, and I just kind of was tired of picking the same one each time. Probably makes more sense to do the admin, especially with the Deus Vault, where you're going to be fighting a lot of people with different religions than you, but for the sake of what I did here, I decided to kind of go with Diplo for this particular campaign. And then you get a lot of these negative dollars or admin. I decided I don't want to lose more prosperity, and then that put me over into bankruptcy. So it erased all your loans, but now I'm bankrupt, right? So give and take. So I'm minting up, and then all of the neighbors are going to obviously see me as being much weaker. And I'm, trying to play this with, no RNG as possible, how you guys would kind of go through the campaign without that perfect RNG. And I'm also trying to end the succession crisis. So I went through bankrupt. I didn't do a restart. I was just trying to play through it and see how that goes, right? But when you're bankrupt, obviously the rise of the Turks are right there. So that's always being the threat. They're already attacking some of their neighbors. So as I'm kind of going through the different events, they ultimately are declaring on me here, right? So just to see how the war kind of shakes out, especially with me being fresh off of bankruptcy, I'm going to need all the help I can get, right? I have some of my vassals, and then I have Trebizond, who's my union member partner at the start of the campaign, or through royal marriage. I think it's easy enough to get that union. It doesn't last for long, and they kind of get eaten up by the Anatolian nations. They split their army up, right? So it's just kind of dividing and conquering, finding where you have windows of opportunities and pockets to have fights that you're willing to kind of take. So you have the numbers advantage against them early game. So kind of wiping them out, reclaiming some of your cores on the Anatolian side of Constantinople, right? Those bordering towns that are connected to your capital. So you already have cores on them. So make sure you kind of take the return cores first and foremost. I think you have to siege down the fort before you can kind of take that province. So then it's just kind of a matter of catching them off guard. You can see they have some of their units split off there. I don't have enough ships to kind of get in there. I eventually am able to land on the territory, and then they get like black flagged. So I'm not able to kind of stack wipe them. But I almost eliminate the Ottomans as any sort of threat down the line. But I don't have enough to take all of their provinces because they won a couple of early game wars. So they have more province score than I'm able to take with all of my reclaimed tours and then all of the new land that they eventually captured. But again, make sure you're using that return cores and then trying to take all of the remaining provinces that weren't cores, because then you're double dipping. So not worried about antagonism when you're taking back your own territory. One thing to be mindful of, you might want to decrease the opinion of Turkish so that the Greek nations don't convert territories before you're able to capture them. So it just makes them harder to convert, the Turks converting Greeks to their culture before you're able to capture them. And then as you can see there, I finally ended the succession crisis by getting my legitimacy up enough, over 50 I believe it was. And then it allowed me to then go to war with Bulgaria for the first war. Easy enough war when you take into consideration the vassals that I've created in the Anatolia side. I'm right now going through the Black Death at the start of the war too, right? So I lose more stability there. Stab is just always going to be a problem, especially at the start, right? You're just always in a hole, it feels like. So just something to kind of be mindful of. It's hard to get rid of those corruption modifiers with negative stability. And until you get rid of those modifiers, then you're just never going to grow your economy, right? You're just kind of rising from an inflation perspective. I ended the crisis, but I'm not out of the economic ruin that you're at from the start of the campaign. You just want to make sure that you can kind of cut down on Bulgaria and Wallachia, their stacks, make sure they don't catch you any kind of off guard, and then kind of carpet siege to make sure that they're not respawning territories. There's a lot of castles here, and I want to take all this territory down the line, right? So I was blocking off as much as I can, taking back my own territory, and then taking as much war score as I possibly can, the 100% war score. I've not taken too much from a territory perspective over the first 10 plus years or so. So I'm not really worried about antagonism, and everyone here is kind of Orthodox anyway, so I'm not worried about pissing off the Sunnis or the Catholics just yet. So I'm taking the water provinces from the start. This way it blocks them from building a navy, and then I'm not worried about my naval getting destroyed in future war with Bulgaria. So making sure I'm taking war reps from both Wallachia and Bulgaria, and then all the cash they can get. And then my vassal rebelled against me, and then the Karamids came in as well. So a lot of times, this is unfortunate because I have no control over the peace deal, which is annoying, right? You go through a huge war with the Karamids, who you have land that you want to take, but you're going to, fight them to the death, and you have to get to 100% war score, and then they give you absolutely nothing for it. So it's always kind of frustrating when these things happen. Hopefully this gets fixed down the line where I have control over the peace treaty, because you'll see that throughout this campaign where these rebels have, and I have no say over the peace treaty. Luckily it's not like against a nation like the Mamluks, where I could be in a 10-year war with them fighting tooth and nail. The Theodosian walls, from a RNG perspective, I just kind of play that just because of the historical and building those walls, rebuilding Constantinople. I did the double Sabbath just for the boost and the uniqueness from that modifier, or that reform for the Orthodox faith. And now I'm starting to get a little bit more income, so I could start to decrease my minting. This brings us to our first war with Serbia. So Serbia, if you watch my playthrough with Serbia, they are pretty powerful. They can overpower your military early game, but as you start to win some of those wars, I'm able to kind of overpower their military now, right? I have a little bit better army tradition just because of all the wars and battles that I fought. So I'm more ready for these fights than they were, right? I think if you're going to play Serbia, you want to attack Byzantine almost day one, just because their army is much, much weaker. Because I've been through a number of battles with the Ottomans, with Bulgaria and Wallachia, I've been able to increase my army tradition through the use of winning battles, so I can overpower their standing levies that they have, and ultimately get into the territories, siege down their capital provinces that are non-forts, sit on the different forts that they have, make sure that I'm wiping out the remaining levies, so that you're always going to be playing that cat and mouse game, right? As you're kind of trying to go around their forts, find the stacks that are remaining, use my vassals to make sure that they're kind of sieging things down, converting those vassals, right, to my religion and cultures, as I start to kind of build them, right, as I'm looking to make sure that they're all Orthodox and Greek, so that I can utilize the territories better in the future, right? I'm doing a wide campaign where I'm just going to do the one province vassal swarm throughout the Balkans and Anatolia as I build my power block, and ultimately start to build out the traditional Roman borders as I build out the proper Byzantium campaign. So I'm looking to see if I can kind of isolate them from Hungary, so that Hungary's not taking the land, which they're known to do in other campaigns. And one thing to note, if you're still in the succession crisis, you probably can only create a custom vassal only. You won't be able to create the fiefdoms while you're going through the succession crisis, but once the succession crisis ends, you can create both the vassals and fiefdoms. So you want to rotate between both of them so that they're not as powerful separately, because they kind of look at it, the combined nature of the vassals and fiefdoms in terms of their strength. And then when you go to the different parliaments, obviously the naval ones can help kind of push you. It develops the coastline. I'm also looking to build a governor over there in Thessaloniki. At least at the start, right? I'm I'm going to be moving that governor down the line, but once I have control over those provinces. But from the start of the campaign, it's easy enough to build a road there and get as much control over your core Greek territory as possible. Here we are. We get called into revolt against one of my vassals. I think I was converting them to my religion, so they kind of revolt, which brings its own challenges, especially if other nations get called in to the war. As you can see, I started to get my stability up, so I can kind of start to remove some of those negative modifiers within my cabinet, just to get my economy moving a little bit more. As you can see here, there's a number of nations that got called in here. Armenia and Georgia got called in as well, so they have pretty large stacks, but they're not connected to my territory, so they have to kind of sail in. So it's not difficult because they kind of send separate stacks, so you just have to wipe, but they do have a pretty substantial standing army, so you want to make sure that they don't send more troops over and then get a good foothold into your nation. But first, it's all about just kind of wiping out Bulgaria, because they've kind of joined in this war on one of the neighboring vassals of theirs that I've created and tried to convert them to my culture, right? And then they rebelled, which is fine, right? It's a kind of a free CB, and I didn't have to kind of go and core that with Bulgaria, but they did call in a couple of these other nations that came to war, right? So you're in a pretty substantial or sizable war here. You don't want to take the vassal that rebelled against you land, because that's unnecessary antagonism. You can just kind of wipe peace or take cash from them and they'll become your vassal again. But you are able to take other land. And in this war, I actually wish I took land from Moldavia here, because they'll eventually become a march of Hungary. So taking land from them down the line is going to be a lot harder, just because you have to go to war with Hungary, who's much stronger than I am. But I didn't do it in this campaign, and again, it's not perfect RNG. But when you get Wallachia and Moldavia on their own, probably better to take land away from them before Poland and or Hungary takes them. But I did take land in right there into the proper Greek territories that also came into this war. So some of these rebellions offers opportunities to take some of the Balkan nations, the Balkan miners in Greece that are still independent at the start of the campaign, and you want to get them before either Sicily or Naples takes this territory. Even I've seen Tunis kind of come into here as well. So you want to make sure that you're getting these territories before other more powerful nations get them, right? And you're going to eventually have to go to war with both Sicily and Naples. So the less that you have to take from them, the better, right? So you kind of take some of these independents in some of these larger wars, even if it's not co-belligerent, right? It's usually just one province. So you're not too worried about the antagonism that comes here. As you can see here, as I was mentioning before, Georgia is sending over some of their troops into my territory, but I'm able to kind of catch them, 900 stack, right? They have 6,000 troops. They're just sending them to slaughter. I really just want them to wipe peace, and they get all of their troops destroyed, which is probably a detriment to them, right? Like the Turks are going to be coming for them next. So they probably should have just taken my white peace deal that I would have gladly accepted them to kind of get out, so I didn't have to unnecessarily take levy losses here. But again, a lot of times it's just kind of time getting those nations out of the war, taking land from Bulgaria, and ultimately getting out of this war, making sure I'm not taking my vassal, and then just taking a simple white peace with the vassal that I had, so that I take some cash, humiliate them just for some of the extra prestige, and create more of a vassals. Right now I've isolated Bulgaria within my country, so now they're not able to be attacked by, outside of Serbia, they're not being able to attacked by some of the larger nations, namely Hungary. And then following that war, a coalition declared on me, unfortunately, which is always an annoying war, right? You can't separate peace any of the nations. And some bigger nations have joined Naples, who's a lot weaker than they usually are. I think they were just in a war with the Papal States, so I think that they usually have like 25,000 troops. They only have like 9,000. So because of that, I was like, let me see if I can actually take away some of their territory. So if I wipe out Ottomans, I can start to get a ticking war score. And with that remaining war score, I'm not worried about wiping out the Ottomans because they're really small. I could potentially take away one of Naples' Balkan vassals, one or two of them if possible. I think the war score ends up being too much to take both of the Balkan vassals that they have in like Morea and then Albania. So I prioritized just taking Albania away from them. So it removes one of their strong Balkan vassals that I don't have to fight down the line. And Albania is a great vassal. I can convert them to my culture pretty easily. And then I have some strong provinces right there on the sea once I can kind of get some more control down the line, right? As I'm building out that vassal swarm across my empire. Really focusing on the Balkan power block at the start while I slowly start to expand into the Anatolia side in the first 30 years or so of this campaign. So this is a bit of a slog from a war perspective. Luckily Naples doesn't have too many ships, so they send over troops like in 4K stacks, kind of isolated. So the 9,000 that they have is stronger than I have, but between me and my vassals I can kind of wipe out their smaller stacks. I have a much stronger army, I think, because of all the wars I've already been into. And then they don't really have a lot of, they're not getting a lot of, territory. Like you could see they're suffering a lot of attrition as they're going into this war. So it is areas of opportunity to really kind of crush them early game and take away some of these territories. Unfortunately, it being a coalition war, I can only take it from the war leader. I can't take it directly from Naples. But I wouldn't have enough to sail over and sit on Naples' capital anyway. But I eventually siege down Albania, get their fort, to get enough of a war score ticking on the Ottomans. As you can see, I'm already at 66% or so. So it's really not too hard. I just have to have those territories sieged in order to take territory in the coalitions. Probably hindsight, better to just wipe peace and fight another day, but because Naples was much weaker than they normally are, I stayed into this war for a lot longer than I probably needed to be. But I eventually get everything sieged down possible. You can say I can take most of the Ottomans, but because they're more than willing to give up the vassals, I can't take the land directly from Naples, but I can have them transfer the vassals over to me. So I happily take that as the peace truce where I can live to fight the Ottomans down the line. And taking the transfer vassal doesn't give me too unnecessary antagonisms as I go into the next wars in the Balkans that I look to capitalize on. So you can see here the coalition disbanded, which is just in time for the next war with Serbia. So it's just, again, another war with Serbia and Wallachia. Pretty straightforward from a war perspective. I'm stronger than both with myself and my vassals. They're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting anyway, so I just kind of make sure that I sit down, really focus on Wallachia to get them out of the war. I took some land from them in the last war, just to hit that little outlet, right, one province. But you want to be mindful because they're non-co-belligerent into this war, taking too much land and too much antagonism. But I'm going to be annexing the rest of Serbia, so I know that could lead to some antagonism in the Balkan area. But if I can at least isolate Wallachia from Hungary, then they're now another island within my country, so down the line I can ultimately wipe them. And then with Serbia, I'm going to take all of their land, and now they're off the map, and it's just one less nation in the coalition, which there's about 6 nations that are willing to join now, one of them being Bulgaria, who will be the source of one of my next focuses. And then as I'm looking to build that casus belli against Bulgaria, I think I was converting Albania over to my religion, and then they rebelled against me, which unfortunately became a much larger war than I was hoping for. As you can see here, I got Albania, I got Portugal, Hungary, Bosnia, Moldavia, Croatia, right? So I got a lot of the Balkan nations here, and then Portugal joins, and they send their armies over too. So the best I can hope for in this war when you're going against much larger enemies, it's making sure that you put your vassals on like defensive so that they're not like sending themselves off to die into the Hungary, which they're known to do. I don't know why supportive. They're not just sticking around me, but you don't want to lose unnecessary war score because they're sending 2,000 stack over to Hungary to get slaughtered by a 25,000 stack that they have. So if you put them on passive or defensive, they tend to stick to their own territories. Whereas supportive, they kind of all go off and do their own thing. Whereas, in my view, as supportive, they should just kind of attach to my army and then kind of do what you want, right? So I just kind of white pieced and was able to get out of that war, only to immediately get called into another coalition war, right? So now I'm in a coalition war against Bulgaria, but then like Naples joined because by the time I got out of that war, Naples was joining a coalition against me. So same thing, but at least it's smaller nations that are declaring on me. So I'm able to siege that down, and then they were kind of unwilling to stay into the war. So coalition wars aren't hard to kind of deal with if you're just looking to get a white peace. And when you're at much stronger nations, you don't want to just kind of wipe out your levies fighting an elongated war if it's an uphill battle, so to speak, to fight. So you're in it trying to see if you can kind of take some of their territory, but Naples really just has much larger levies, right? They've recovered from the war that they had with the Papal States before they kind of got into a coalition against me last time. So I'm just being a little bit more mindful, right? They have a pretty huge stack there. Let them kind of wander around in my territory to see areas where I can kind of get some war score when they have some split vassals. As you can see, they're wiping some of my smaller vassal stacks, unfortunately, which gives a little bit ticking war score on Bulgaria's side. So I'm just trying to see the most war score I can get. If they're sitting on a fort, I'll let them kind of sit on that for a long time and siege down some of their non-fort provinces that they have in the Balkans just to maximize the war score I have, just kind of keeping an eye on where they are, where they're sending their troops. As you can see, they have two stacks, one of a 6,000 over there in Albania area, and then they have like a 7 stack over there that's coming in into the the Constantinople area. So you're just monitoring where they are, where they might potentially get stack wiped, and ultimately get out of this war as soon as possible, which is what I wanted to do. Following that, Ottomans lost the war to one of the Anatolian Turkish nations, so that was a pretty straightforward war, and then they're finally wiped off the map much later than it needed to be, but I just had other focuses and priorities. And here we're going to war. I have some reclaims in the Anatolian side. Probably should have went after these earlier, but the Karamids and the different nations here on the Anatolia side have reclaimed territories that I still have cores on, so it's not like a rush to get those territories that are my core provinces. I think you will lose them eventually, so you don't want to wait too long, but I still am able to get those recore claims. Unfortunately, they start to convert some of those territories over to their culture, which is why I reduce the opinions of Turkish on the culture tab so that the Greeks don't convert as quickly to Turkish culture, so that they're not able to convert over the Greek territories to my culture, just based on their opinions, right? Their Greek opinion of Turkish culture, and me being the culture leader has a huge influence of that, right? So, again, the Karamids are quite a big nation. I don't want to take non-co-belligerent territory from them just because I don't want the Mamluks to get into a coalition against me. So I'm being very mindful there. I don't want the Mamluks to declare on me because I'm not ready to face them yet, right? They have like 80,000 troops. Sicily was just at war with Naples, and they've lost their alliances with like Bohemia and a couple of the other nations that they had. So kind of fresh territory, and I can annex all of the Sicilian territories and create vassals there. And then Sicily has Balkan vassals that will become my vassals if I annex all of their territory. So if you take if you can 100% war score Sicily, then their vassals become your vassals. So I don't have to take the Balkan land, they become my vassals, and then it's just a matter of converting them to my culture and religion, because I believe they're Catholic and Venetian culture, I believe, in the Balkans. So you want to convert them over from like the Italian cultures that they've changed to in this game from Greek, and you move them over to your culture. So at the conclusion of this war, there's only a couple of minor Balkan independence, and then Naples does have some territory still in the Balkans. But again, straightforward war. I'm able to siege down those provinces and then ultimately get all the territories into Sicily and then create those vassals in the Anatolia side. And that brings us to the next war with the Bulgarians, right? I have been able to improve my stability and get a lot of the negative events. So now my economy is actually not doing so terrible, right? I've been mindful of taking cash in all of the wars. And if I get enough cash, I can really start to let the inflation die down. So Bulgaria and Moldova not Moldova, Wallachia are in this war. I don't actually want to take the non-co-belligerent Wallachian land because they're really not a threat to be lost to any of the other nations because nobody else has access to them besides me. So I'll just kind of leave them for a future war, especially as I'm going to be annexing all of Bulgaria in this land. I can kind of just take their cash, humiliate them, war reps, and then just kind of annex all of Bulgaria, and now they're no longer a threat. And then use the synod. If you do the internal affairs on the patriarch events, that gives you that stability, which I think it just makes sense, especially since you're always in a stab hole at the early game. So use that to kind of get that free 7 stab, or use it for legitimacy if you need that, if you're still trying to get out of the succession crisis. And here you can see I was in an easy war with Anatolia, and then wouldn't you know it, Hungary decides to declare me. So you know when to move out of a war. I was easily able to wipe peace out of that war with enough territory siege down, because I knew I needed to focus my entire attention, and more importantly my vassals' attention, on Hungary, who is much more substantial. So I've put all of my vassals on passive so that they're not going off and doing their thing. As you can see, they got much more of an army, but I guess I had the creator luck, so to speak, the recording luck, because Bohemia declares on Hungary in the middle of this war. So you could see I'm sieging down territories. I'm like, where did Hungary go? Like, they just had those huge stacks. I'm like being mindful of where I'm going. I'm trying to attack Bulgaria, and then I looked and Hungary's at war with Bohemia. So they had like 30,000 troops, and all of a sudden they only had like 17,000 troops. I'm like, what happened? So they're at war with Bohemia, and they actually, I think, lose that war with Bohemia. So I'm just kind of going into here. I'm sieging things down. I'm like, when is the shoe going to drop? When am I going to get completely blindsided? I'm like at the point where I can actually kind of white piece them. So I'm at the point where it's like, okay, I can just siege things down, hopefully get a white piece, and then I just keep going, right? I'm like just continuing to siege down province by province. I know I don't have enough time to like siege down a fort, but there's no forts on this side of Hungary, right? It's just all capital provinces. So I can get large lands of clay here with the intention, I'm like, hey, can I steal Bosnia from them, right? Like here you can see they got that 4,000 stack that's kind of wandering around there. They're sniping off some of my vassals, but they've lost a ton of their levies in that war against Bohemia. So now they're a lot more manageable. It's a little bit more 1v1 with me and my vassal swarm. But again, they still have pretty substantial 11,000. It's more than my standing levy, so I'm just kind of playing keep away. Luckily here, it's like by the skin of my teeth. I think my vassal comes in at the last second there. And I know that I'm kind of starting to dwindle. Like after that fight, I only have like a 1,000 stack, and you just really can't rely on your vassals to do anything that makes any sort of a semblance of sense. So now I see them about to take a huge loss there. and that's when it's time to get out of the war. But I was able to take all of the Bosnian land out from under them, and then get out of there and live to fight another day. And then a lot of times when you're in those wars, you're just always looking for like opportunities. And Crete was an independent nation. I built my spy network against them, so I just kind of declared on them. Immediately following the Hungary War, I was able to quickly wipe them down. They didn't have any allies, so it was just free war score. So I was able to get that peace treaty with the Anatolian nations. So now I'm ready to take more territory from them, reclaim the land that is rightfully mine. Fortunately, it's another decade later, so it's just going to be a little bit more work to reconvert some of that culture back to mine, and more importantly, the religions back to mine. So I'll just have to have a cabinet member helping to kind of convert some of those territories back to me. But between the different lands, now I'm starting to take more of the coastline, start to take more of the proper cores that I have from a territory perspective. So I took the Karamid, reclaimed territories that I had, and then all of the territories there on the coastline. So all of my land and my cores have been reclaimed in that war. So happy with that progress as I got into the 1400s here. And then moving in 1410s, meritocracy just spawned, and there's a lot of good tech here, especially in decentralized vassal swarm. Loyalty, speed of integration, loyalty of vassals, right? So a lot of good tech that you want to kind of queue up once you kind of get that to spawn into your nation will just help you with the overwhelming number of vassals that you'll be dealing with, right? As I'm looking for them to kind of culture convert and religious convert all of the territory. So you're always kind of improving those opinions of them, and you're always going to have a red or yellow heart in this campaign as you're constantly trying to change them over to your religion and then your culture, because the religion will move quicker, all right, if their core culture is 100%, and then once they're 100% in your religion, then you start to move them into your culture, which will then also move and improve better as well. So here we are at the first war with Naples, right? I wanted to reclaim the Balkan territories. I had my vassals there. I have a stronger navy than them, so they have overwhelming numbers, but they're divided, right? So I'm able to sell my troops, find the smaller stack, wipe them out before they can kind of capitalize on that. The other one's stuck on my fort that's much larger, so now I'm kind of playing the game of how much do I need from a war score perspective. They have a couple of nations in here, Provence and another nation over there in the Alps, like a one province, right? That is kind of doing a pretty good job on my vassals, just because they have like 9,000 armies. So I had to raise, unfortunately, mercenaries, which actually isn't the end of the world. It actually helps from like a composition perspective to have like both army or levy and mercenaries. Just helps like with your overall ability to like win wars. So I have like those two kind of siege over, sell them over, and then simultaneously attack that half stack of their armies, and then I sell it over into Naples, and now I can trap the much larger stack in Sicily. So now they have no access to their territories other than selling their boats. I think they do sell a smaller stack, but I'm sitting on Naples. They eventually get that fort over in Sicily that my vassal has, but it's my vassal, it's not me, so the war score is not substantial, and I'm just kind of carpet sieging their entire country. So I'm able to take all of that war score, all of their cash, and help kind of snowball my economy. I eventually get Provence out of the war, right? My vassals are now sitting on all of their forts, and now I'm sitting on all of their forts in Italy, and they have a pretty large levy, but because of me and my vassals' navies, they're kind of trapped in Sicily. Mainly because I have been sitting on like the Strait of Messina, so they're not able to walk over to their territory. But I'm also just being mindful of where their boats are, so they're not like sailing it out from underneath. So I get all of the Balkan territory, and now here we are in the 1420s. back at war in Anatolia. Straightforward war, although they do have allies with some of the hordes over in Persia, which if you look at my Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, which was timely, I released it like right before the start of the Iran war that started like after I released that video. They have like a strong hordes, and like the first stage, like their armies are a lot stronger than like the levies from a horde perspective, and they just have like just a number of vassals. They just keep kind of swimming and swimming. I eventually am able to just pay money and they go away after a year, but they're just kind of annoying, especially because the Karamids have like nothing to really stop me, but the hordes, like they're not even loyal to them, and they just keep coming in wave after wave. So if you're going into war with any of these nations in Anatolia and they're like a tribute of the hordes, like you could be at war with like 40 nations like I am right now. I eventually get them out, as I said. I think I just paid money and let them humiliate me or something like that. Do whatever you can, right, to kind of get out of there without breaking your nation. Siege everything down. And then at the end of this, it's just more about like isolating them from potentially Mamluks expanding. Luckily, Mamluks haven't been too aggressive. In EU4, Mamluks would capitalize on a broken Ottomans and kind of swoop right in. But because of the control mechanics, I think on normal difficulty, they don't really have intention to kind of go further into Anatolia from what I've seen, right, as from an expansion perspective. Finally getting some of my stability up so I can kind of remove more of those negative modifiers, which is just taking quite a bit of time, probably longer than it should have. But again, it was just kind of the playthrough and let the chips fall where they may because of all of the negative stab events that I was kind of dealing with and all of the different focuses and stuff that I was looking to capitalize on. I think I finally removed that last one here in the 1430s. And here we are at war again. I mentioned I left Wallachia before because I didn't want to take the unnecessary antagonism at the time over there in the Balkans. So I was able to quickly go to war with them, and it was a pretty straightforward war, right? My vassals just kind of swooped on and sat on all of the different forts that they had. I think I dismantled the forts in the last one, but they have since rebuilt them. I was actually hoping that they were going to get like some of those other territories as maybe ally or whatever, especially in the Balkans, some of like the Genoa territories. And then Genoa actually lost that. They must have been in a war in Italy and lost that territory and the peace treaty. Because now it's an independent nation, I think eventually the Knights take it over. In the Age of Discovery, I go admin here, I think just with a lot of the control, a lot of the different focuses here that just speeds integration, things that you're going to need, proximity. Building cost is obviously a big one, right? That just kind of snowballs. And then pop conversion, right? It's a no-brainer. I'm looking to cover a lot of territories. So that is the focus. I went admin for the third age here. As we move into the 1440s. And as I mentioned before, Genoa lost those provinces over in Anatolia, and then the Knights took them over. So this was an easy war against the Knights in Cyprus. And I had intention of taking both territories, so it was kind of a 2-for-1. Cyprus is a lot bigger in this game. It's a bunch of counties that you have to kind of take over here, but they have one fort, right? And then it's just me and my vassals just kind of all sailed over there, sat on all of their forts, which just takes quite a bit of time to siege down. As long as you have enough of a levy, you can kind of start to build that out. And as we moved into the Age 3, you're going to start to rely less and less on levies as you start to build out your standing army. And you can see my economy's really starting to snowball now, right? I have a lot of money here that I've been kind of hoarding a little bit here, mainly to take some of the institutions as soon as they start to spread to my nation, right? The sooner I can get some of those, the sooner I can kind of get ahead of a lot of the countries, especially as I start to go to war with the Mamluks, right? I need every leg I can get up on them just because they have so much more territory. So it's more about cleaning up now, right? Like there's a couple of smaller nations in Balkans that I have to still kind of take over. I think there's two, that green one and that brown one, right? So taking them when and where I can, if I'm using either spy network or I think I was rivaling them just so I can get the destroy CB against each of them. Just waiting to eventually go back to war with Naples, right? Like, what do you do to pass the time? Because it's really not a substantial war by any stretch of the imagination. Naples, again, same strategy. Trap their troops, right? I've sieged down that one county on the border of the Messina Straits. Now they can't sail past, and they're kind of trapped on my island, and I'm able to kind of stack wipe them. So it's just kind of more about keeping them there and then sitting on their key territories in Sicily so I can stack wipe them. They have, I think, still Provence as an ally and some of the other smaller nations, but nothing that my vassals can't handle. And they do have some standing army or some standing levies that are still on the Italian side, so I'm just making sure that I'm not moving too far away from my different stacks as I'm sieging down Naples. They have a lot of forts in Italy that you have to kind of siege down, so you're just trying to use one or two stacks to siege things down, but make sure they're not going behind you to unsiege that fort in Sicily, right? So they're not going to catch my vassal and my smaller stack there. So just making sure that they're not catching you off guard with what they do have from a levy perspective. But again, I have the overwhelming numbers between myself and all my vassals now, so I really have a chance to kind of break them from an economy perspective. And I have intention of taking over Rome, right? They've actually wiped Rome from them, or taken Rome from the Papal States, who has only a couple of minor provinces over in Italy still. I think they had like two provinces over there that they were in the war, but I think I was able to wipe them out. I think they were their vassal, but they weren't loyal, so I was able to just white peace them. And Papal States as a vassal is actually quite dangerous, because like all of a sudden out of nowhere they could raise like 50,000 troops because like Castile is sending troops on their behalf to fight a religious war or whatever. So something to be mindful if you're ever at war with Papal States. Like, you could be like, oh, I have the numbers, and all of a sudden like they have like 70,000 troops out of nowhere. So caution to the wise. I was very happy to see Naples won that, but it also explains why earlier in the game why Naples had 40,000 troops and all of a sudden they had like 9,000 in the coalition against me. So again, I had enough war score to take the remainder of Sicily. I took Naples province out from under them, and then I took Rome from them. So it really kind of wraps up campaign, or the first part of the campaign, right? I'm on the path. I've dominated the Balkans area. I really started to make my stretch to Anatolia, with the intention to start to expand into the Syrian territories, eventually get into Egypt and North Africa as I start to wage wars against both the Mamluks and Tunisia, and eventually Morocco, to eventually move into the traditional Balkan borders. But at the conclusion of the campaign here, I have all of Sicily. I have most of like what Naples has from a strong territory perspective, but they do have still quite a bit of a foothold in Italy with the remaining southern provinces. But with a strong vassal, that will be where Naples is. And I will keep Rome because I've been pushing towards naval governor, so I can build a naval governor in Rome and then sell it to Naples, and then eventually do the same trick that I did with within my England campaign, where I was able to have well over the number of naval governors spread out all across the Mediterranean Sea, just to have as much control as possible throughout as I start to expand and try to do a Roman borders or Roman Empire campaign, a traditional Roman Empire campaign, which requires like 27 counties, 2,700 counties or something like that. Again, create these vassal swarms and make sure that you're using that random vassal because it's not taking potential cabinet members away from you. Something that I've learned from some of the creator videos I've watched. I didn't even realize that that was a thing. I thought it was just randomly took one of your potential cabinet members, but it actually just auto generates a new cabinet member. So definitely something to do when you're kind of building. I've got all of the Balkans area except for that like one nation that has like 2 counties, which will be an easy enough war. But I have everything else, right? Everything else in purple and grayish purple. Is mine in the territory. As I'm starting to convert all of those territories into me, I have so many diplomats improving opinions because I've forced them into my religions and cultures. As you can see, that one nation has 430 levy, and they have no allies. So it's just more about using a CB or a cabinet. Actually was building the spy network in the middle of that Naples war, so that CB is ready, and I just declared war on them, so I'm now able to declare a rival against them, even though they're one province, which is funny enough. I can get that destroy CB against the smaller nation. But if you liked part 1 of the video, see part 2 where I start to expand further into Italy, and then further into the Anatolia, and eventually into Egyptian and North African lands. So please like and subscribe, and hopefully you can comment along the way. It certainly wasn't the perfect playthrough of the first 100+ years or so, but it just kind of gives you a flavor as to how you overcome some of the initial obstacles as Byzantium, right? Even without perfect RNG, how you can overcome those economic ruin that you're in at the start to really have one of the stronger economies in the game with the use of the swarm of vassals you can create quickly in Balkans and Anatolia. Thanks everyone for watching.